Daily Web TV is dedicated to bringing our viewers interesting stories about companies in the GTA who are doing new and innovative things. We visited MSCI, a company who is building a communications constellation they have dubbed Backhaul to the Future. Here's the interview. Today, I'm joining Mr. David Cooper, President and Chief Executive Officer of Microsat Systems Canada Inc, or as it's more commonly known, MSCI. David, it's a pleasure to be here with you today, and let's get right to it. You have some very exciting news to share with us.
Yes, indeed, Sheila. MSCI is leading an initiative to create a new constellation of microsatellites for global communications called COMMStellation. COMMStellation is a combination of communication and constellation.
So is COMMStellation actually a commercial application?
Yes, Sheila. COMMStellation is the latest initiative from MSCI's microsatellite product line. COMMStellation is a constellation comprised of 78 satellites in 6 polar low Earth orbits and 20 ground stations designed for satellite communications, very specifically to address the weakest link in the global internet network, backhaul connectivity.
Can you tell me more about backhaul?
Sheila, almost every country in the world has users of the internet outside of major cities. These users most often only have a slow dial-up phone line connection. We've all suffered through that. Maybe they don't even have a connection to the internet at all. And on the other end, in the city, is the global fiber optic networks. This is rich with all the content and the data and the movies that we all want. These users want it also. The connection between the users and the fiber optic network is called backhaul. High-speed backhaul infrastructure is the single most important enabler to the growth of internet business models and wealth generation. Every country wants it, and if it doesn't have it, it will fall behind.
What was the impetus of COMMStellation?
Well, the first major thrust for us was the backhaul bottleneck. It's been front and center on the stage in the media for over a year now. According to many sources, most mobile operators in North America are either at or close to network capacity. The global market forecast for mobile phone subscribers is estimated to be 5 billion by the end of 2010. On top of that, the smartphones that we've all come to love, this market is exploding, with amazing features such as mobile video phones, streaming movies, other very heavy data applications. These devices are choking mobile networks.
But aren't we already wired for data?
Yes, we are. Most major urban centers are already wired with fiber optic cable. But fiber networks are very expensive. The cities have the highest volume of users to share the cost of that infrastructure. The rural areas, on the other hand, have significantly fewer users, and the spans of distance are much greater for laying fiber. Ultimately, the cost to install fiber isn't financially viable where there isn't the population to support it. Yet governments around the world recognize that high-speed internet connectivity is a wealth generator, and they want it. They want equal access for all of their citizens, urban and rural.
Could you give me an example of that, Dave?
Sure, Sheila. Here in Canada, the CRTC is pushing to extend high-speed internet connections to all Canadians. Industry estimates, on the other hand, to extend that fiber network are in the order of $7 billion and will take 10 years to implement. COMMStellation will be about 1/10 of that cost and be twice as fast to implement.
So if fiber is too expensive for rural areas, COMMStellation plans to bridge that gap?
Yes. Yes. Again, here in Canada, some estimates today project 700,000 Canadian homes don't have broadband internet service because backhaul's not in place. COMMStellation can bring high-speed internet service to every Canadian household that doesn't have it, at about 10% of the estimated cost of stringing fiber.
Now, is this just Canada that's facing this challenge?
This is just a Canadian example, but every government around the world is facing these same challenges. COMMStellation is not just for Canada, it's a global constellation. As a backhaul link using satellites, COMMStellation can either augment backhaul in wired parts of the world or even provide it in parts of the world where there is no cost-effective solution for terrestrial networks.
Do you have any competitors out there? Are there other constellations?
Sure, there is another backhaul constellation being built that will orbit the Earth at 8,000 kilometers. A medium Earth orbit, or so-called MEO constellation. Their main focus is quite specific. They're targeting populations that live between the equator and plus and minus 45 degrees of latitude, so a swath around the equator.
Well, then if MEO constellation also does backhaul, why is COMMStellation different?
Well, first of all, COMMStellation is a polar LEO constellation. So the microsats travel north and south over the poles. This is very different from a MEO constellation, an equatorial one, where the satellites all track perpendicular to ours, and they follow each other around the equator.
So what would be the disadvantage of MEO's equatorial orbit then?
The MEO constellation will provide coverage up to only 70% of the world's population, mostly those in underdeveloped nations around the equator that either don't have internet access at all, or at least for the time being they don't have it, and they can only supply low data rates. COMMStellation will have the potential to bring large capacity, high-speed communications to all of Earth's citizens around the entire globe. COMMStellation will orbit the Earth at 1,000 kilometers versus the MEO constellation at 8,000 kilometers. This means that the MEO satellite has to spread its bandwidth signal over a much larger area, thereby reducing the amount allocated to any one user.
So how exactly does that work then, David?
Well, Sheila, imagine a flashlight beam shining down on the Earth. You get a circle on the ground from the beam, or a footprint. From 8,000 kilometers, this beam is very wide, and it covers a huge portion of the Earth. Now, as you move the flashlight beam down towards the Earth and you get closer and closer, the footprint gets smaller and smaller. The beam becomes stronger and stronger and more focused. At 1,000 kilometers, where we are, the COMMStellation footprint is over 60 times stronger than a comparable beam at 8,000 kilometers.
So then what does this mean to the user?
It's very important. When the beam is stronger, the available bandwidth is greater, and the potential speed of the communication for each user is faster. COMMStellation satellites will provide a minimum of 5 times the speed of a MEO equatorial satellite, even at the equator. What's even more interesting, that unlike a MEO constellation whose signals begins to fade the further away you get from the equator, COMMStellation's bandwidth available to each user actually increases as the microsatellites converge. So as you get closer to the poles, you can have 2 or 3 or 4 microsatellites covering much the same area that's typically only covered by one microsatellite at the equator.
So what impact does that have?
Well, what this means is that areas such as the northern half of the US, all of Canada, Europe, Scandinavia, China, and Russia, these countries will all experience 10 to 15 times the speed of a MEO equatorial constellation, even at its strongest point, which is lucky for them, as these locations will only get limited or even no service at all from a MEO equatorial constellation.
So does this mean COMMStellation has global coverage then?
Absolutely, Sheila. COMMStellation will have 100% global coverage and will provide up to 15 times more speed and 10 times the total bandwidth capacity of any other backhaul constellation.
But what about the costs then, David?
Well, because our microsatellites are much less expensive than traditional satellites, we can build more for the same cost. We can afford to populate a polar constellation and get global coverage and put them in a low Earth orbit much closer to the users. The satellites, therefore, don't have to be as big, they don't have to be as powerful. We can get more of them into a launcher, we can afford to launch spares, and we can afford to replace them sooner as new technology evolves. The key to financial viability of COMMStellation is the disruptively reduced cost and schedule for building MSCI microsatellites in comparison with traditional satellites.
Well, this sounds like it has amazing potential.
It does, Sheila. COMMStellation will be better, it will be operational faster, and it costs hundreds of millions of dollars less than a MEO backhaul constellation.
That is really exciting. Now, who will be your actual customers?
We are providing backhaul connectivity to the global fiber network. Our customers will be any entity that either doesn't have this access or wants more of the access, either for their own use, such as a government, or a service provider so that they can sell it to their customer base. This includes numerous global internet service providers, mobile operators, other satellite service providers, and enterprise VSAT applications.
Are you looking for partners, Dave?
Absolutely. We are looking for mobile operators who are at or nearing capacity, service providers that want to improve the service to their customers, technology partners who can bring complementary technologies to COMMStellation, or even governments that want to improve the lives of their citizens.
Well, David, thank you so much for sharing this great information with us today, and I really do look forward to an update soon. Now, if somebody would like to find out some more information about COMMStellation and what you're doing with this project, how can they connect with you?
More information is available at COMMStellation.com, or folks can send me an email at COMMStellation@mscinc.ca.
David, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sheila.
Since this interview, MSCI has publicly announced the COMMStellation initiative. We look forward to updates from MSCI on this exciting project.